The next gentleman is somebody who has created one of Schibsted Classified's largest competitor. He's created a 150 million classified company called OLX. But that's not the most impressive thing with him, I think. He's a business angel with around 120 investments. Rumor has it that only 4 of them, the investments he's made, has ever failed. 4 has paid for every one else of them, and most of the other 120 are doing really fine. There's only one business angel in the world that have had similar performance that I've heard of, and that's his partner, José Marin, who played the piano here at SIME last year. Now, for the first time on SIME stage, Fabrice Grinda. Fabrice, welcome to SIME.
Hi, Ola.
So what I would like you to do is just take it away, because you got a very interesting brain, and I want us to dive right into it, where you can share some of the things that you see from your horizon.
Sure. So I've been spending a fair amount of time of late, thinking about what's next for the world. And also, we live in a little bit of a bubble. I mean, in the internet world, everything's optimistic and growing, et cetera. And yet in the greater world, it doesn't seem to be that way. And so I've been thinking about how do we reconcile the fact that our day-to-day lives seem to be great, and yet when you think about the world at large, things seem to be bad. And what are the technologies on the horizon that maybe are going to allow us to alleviate this? So, if you look around the world, I mean, it really feels like we live in difficult times. It's financial crisis, sovereign debt crisis, euro crisis, Syrian conflict, global warming. Basically, we're bombarded nonstop with despairing news. Actually, can you put the next slide? Okay, there. So in Europe today, the mood is morose and the prospects seem dire. And the general consensus is that things are going to be bad. The only conversation is how bad are things going to be? And the more I've been thinking about this, the more I realize that the consensus is dead wrong. And in fact, we're facing a wonderful future. And what I want to do today is actually explain to you why things are going to turn out to be so great. So first, let me take you back in history. Let me take you back to the 1970s. In the late 1970s, it looked like the end of Western civilization. I mean, we had dictatorships in Eastern Europe and Latin America. We had stagflation with inflation above and unemployment above 10%. We had the US had lost Vietnam. The Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan. You had the Club of Rome making announcements saying that we'd run out of oil and we'd run out of natural resources within 40 years. It really looked like the world had come to an end. No one predicted that over the next 40 years we'd see a revolution. We'd have democracies around the world, including Latin America and Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. Inflation and unemployment would fall dramatically globally. That we'd see the greatest creation of wealth in the history of humanity as 1 billion people came out of poverty. 650 million people came out of poverty alone in China, and completely changing urban landscapes, as you can see in the images of Shenzhen, the before and after pictures, if you want. Despite 40 years of record consumption of oil, natural gas, we now have more reserves than we did then. And the way we live has been profoundly transformed by the likes of computers and cell phones and the way we work. And if you take a step back and you look at a 100-year time horizon, it's even more true. Every few years there are recessions. On a greater scale, there are even things like the Great Depression or the oil shocks. And despite that, the story is one of unabated economic growth, where on a long-term trend line, the things like the Great Depression appear as mere blips. In fact, over the last 100 years, life expectancy has doubled. Infant mortality is divided by 10. GDP per capita is multiplied by 3. And in fact, things like the cost of food, the cost of transportation, the cost of communications have all divided from a factor of 10 to a factor of 1,000. It's to the point that we've redefined what poverty means. Today, poverty in the US, people under the poverty line, 99% of them have electricity and running water. 88% have a cell phone, 70% of a car. These are luxuries that were unimaginable to the richest of people 100 years ago. We also happen to be living in the most peaceful time in human history. I mean, if you look at the news, you wouldn't believe that that's true. And yet, not only in the last 100 years, but over the history of humanity, these are the most peaceful times ever. So we're truly living in extraordinary times. And what I want to tell you today is that improvements of this magnitude are actually continuing today. When historians 100 years in the future look back at this time period and they think through what was the most interesting thing of the last 10 years, I don't think they'll be mentioning the Iraq-Afghanistan war or the Euro crisis. I think they'll be mentioning the rise of Africa. 6 of the top 10 fastest growing countries the last 10 years have been African, and the forecasts are 7 of those to be the fastest growing in the next 10 years. And so Africa is rapidly becoming integrated in the global economy. At the same time, you're seeing countries like Estonia showing what existing technology can do when it's applied to sectors of the economy that have never been touched by it, like healthcare and public services and education, which account for more than 50% of GDP. So in Estonia today, it's on the next slide. In Estonia today, 24% of people voted online at the last election. 93% of people pay their taxes online. You can set up a company in minutes online. All Estonians have their medical records online, and all school homework, et cetera, is online. And so the application of technology today, of existing technology, can profoundly transform countries. And just as exciting, you have new technologies around the corner that are going to revolutionize almost every sector of our economy. Manufacturing, healthcare, education, communications, transportation, energy, food, and water. And because we're so busy and living in the present, people don't actually think about these changes, even though they're essentially inevitable. So 3D printing is not only revolutionizing prototyping, but it's also increasingly being combined with traditional manufacturing to make end products. So 25% of the 3D printer output is already production-ready items. And it also has the potential to revolutionize medicine. We've printed a mini kidney recently, and it's reasonably easy to imagine the next 10, 15 years, 3D printed organs will basically eliminate the organ shortage, and will also eliminate rejection issues as they will be printed on your genotype. In terms of medicine is also on the verge of revolution. Watson, which is IBM's supercomputer that famously won Jeopardy, is already better at diagnosing certain types of cancers than doctors are. Now, that makes sense. A computer doesn't get bored, and it will look at every micron of an MRI or an X-ray. And yeah, it cost about $21 million to build and develop Watson, but today's $21 million supercomputer is tomorrow's cell phone. And so, in fact, we're actually probably 5 years away from having a couple $100 cell phone-sized medical tricorder of Star Trek fame, which can diagnose most illnesses better than a doctor can. Education is also finally on the cusp of revolution. I mean, if you took Socrates from 2,500 years ago and you brought him here today, one of the few things he'd recognize is how we educate our children. And you have a teacher of varying quality teaching students of varying quality. But finally, you're starting to see evolution. You have a number of schools in the US that are now being completely computerized, and they're preparing curriculum adapted to the level of each student and with continuous testing, so they're engaged. You're starting to see scalability as you have MOOCs like Udacity and Coursera where the best professors are attracting hundreds of thousands of students. And education itself is transforming itself from a one-time event that ends, when you graduate high school or a master's program, to an ongoing, a lifelong endeavor that you can do at every age, every stage in life, every sex, etc., on sites like Khan Academy or Code Academy. Transportation is on the verge of a revolution. I bet if we asked people today in the audience, what percentage of you think that 20 or 30% of cars will be completely self-driven and automated in the future? Most people would say, a very small portion. But it basically looks inevitable. Every year, about $121 billion is wasted in congestion in the US alone. About 1.2 million people die in 50 million accidents every year, causing untold costs. And originally, people thought in order to have a self-driving car, you need like new infrastructure and highways, et cetera. But Google has demonstrated that that's not true. They put these radars and scanners on cars. It costs about $100,000 today. But these cars have already driven millions of miles with no accidents. And they read traffic lights, they avoid pedestrians, et cetera. And so, again, $100,000 with Moore's Law will be peanuts in the future. And so, within 10 years, I actually predict that 30 to 40% of the trips will be completely self-driven, or at least 90% of them will be self-driven. In fact, Tesla had recently announced that within 3 years, they want to make a car that will drive itself in 90% of occasions or for 90% of trips. And at the same time, you're already seeing this technology seep through into high-end cars with self-parking system, auto-braking system. So, I mean, our cars, the way we drive cars, are going to be completely revolutionized. You probably won't need a driver's license because we humans are very fallible. Communications are also very rapidly evolving. I mean, it makes a lot of sense for Google to be working on glasses because I actually think that smartphones are going to disappear. We're making so much progress in brain reading technology. Today, you can actually read images, in low resolution albeit, from people's minds. So you can reconstruct whatever they're seeing and show it on a screen. And we can also already project your thoughts onto a screen with a lot of practice. Though that technology is improving very rapidly. And so it's not too hard to imagine that within 10 years, you could actually be sending your thoughts to your glasses if you want, and they'll be displaying whatever you want just based on your thought. And so you're going to have the equivalent, if you want, of technology-augmented telepathy. It probably won't be with the Google glasses, which are very ugly. Maybe it'll have lasers that will be writing directly in your retina, overlaying over the real flow, or intelligent contact lenses. In the further or more distant future, it's probably going to be direct brain-to-brain communication. We had the first in-lab brain-to-brain communication that happened earlier this year in August. So this is further away. This is not in the next 10, 15 years. 10, 15 years, for sure, you're going to have mind reading to your device to open web browsers, get information, etc. Mind-to-mind, a technology-augmented mind-to-mind is probably 20 years in the future. But again, it's inevitable. It seems like very sci-fi-y, but people don't remember that 10 years ago we barely had a cell phone and then no one had a smartphone, and today it feels like we can't live without them. And the same thing is happening here. It's just the next evolution. Now, energy is maybe the one that's making me the most optimistic. People keep worrying about peak oil, etc. But the concept that we're going to run out of energy is ludicrous. Every 12 minutes, we get enough energy from the sun to power our entire economies for an entire year. So the issue is not abundance, it's accessibility. But the good news is solar is following a very slow Moore's law. It's about improving about 14% per year in terms of energy production per dollar. So in 1977, it cost upwards of $70 per watt. Today, it's 74 cents a watt. It's a 100-to-1 improvement. That means today we're at grid parity in solar in remote places. We're about, in 2025, we should be at grid parity in solar in sunny places in Western Europe and the US. And by 2035, it should be at grid parity everywhere. So what I'm trying to say is, even without government intervention, without subsidies, without regulation, we're going to completely move away from a carbon economy to a solar economy, and that's excluding things like fusion or radical improvements in other technology by the middle of the 21st century. And when that happens, wonderful things happen. Once the marginal megawatt cost is very low, you can start wasting energy, and then it solves a lot of other problems. I mean, it used to be that computing power was super expensive, and you need to book time. Now you have so much computing power, you can play Angry Birds, you can check Facebook. Once you have unlimited free energy, all of a sudden you can desalinate salt water, and so you no longer have a fresh water problem. You can grow crops in the desert, you no longer have a food problem. And all that's, is going to happen in the next basically 30, 40 years, and probably maybe even before then. And so, as people, we are truly blessed to be living in this amazing time. And as entrepreneurs and investors, we have the privilege of helping to build this wonderful world of tomorrow. And so we will pick up the mantle left by our forefathers and create a better world for all, a world of equality, of opportunity, and of plenty.
Thank you very much, Fabrice.